All right, so welcome to our third webinar here. If you've joined us before, we've had two previous ones. Again, those are up on the ACCSC website, so if you had to miss it or you couldn't make it to the previous ones, feel free to jump there and check them out as well. But this one, we're going to focus on creating your course, and this is mapping activity to objectives. And I'm going to toss it to my co-presenter here, Aaron. And Aaron, you could kind of lead us out of the gate.
Yeah, and first I want to add for the past two workshops on the ACCSC website, you will also find the area with the certificates for that, as well as the sign-in sheets for that as well. So all of that for any of the past ones can be found on the ACCSC website in the webinar location. So yes, I'm Aaron, and David has been talking to you, and we are instructional designers in the curriculum department with Ciena Education Services. And a little about our company. So we, work to provide education solutions in a variety of capacities through software applications, through licensing, accreditation, compliance, brand and marketing, and then myself and David primarily work with the curriculum side of things and developing curriculum and basically any sort of curriculum-based solutions that might come about, reviews, developing courses, moving courses on ground to online, and everything in between. And so, as Dave was talking about, this presentation specifically, we are talking about, going and mapping activities, mapping your course. The first thing we do want to touch on is just basically summarizing the idea of developing learning objectives. And if you were at the webinar last Thursday, you heard us talk a lot about these. And these basically lay the foundation for the activities that you're going to be creating and that you're going to be mapping. And so, if you weren't able to make it and are interested in some of the pre-stuff to this webinar, feel free to look at that on the ACCSC website. So basically, learning objectives, these are outcome driven, have clear acceptance criteria. Both the instructor and the student, they know what they have to do in order to achieve the objective. The instructor knows what the student has to do, so when they're looking at it, they can say, yes, the student met this, or the student did not meet this. And accordingly, they need to have, action verbs. You need to be doing something. And the main thing we're going to be talking about today is that it has to align with an activity or a lesson. So we can create learning objectives. They can be perfect for the course. If they are not covered in, at least one way, typically multiple ways, then how are we going to know that a student has met that specific learning objective? So again, the idea of this is we have our objectives. Now, what are we going to do? So, the portion of going and creating those learning objectives, it is a long process of working with various subject matter experts, working with faculty, getting approval. And so now we're at the point of we have those in place. We took all that time and effort. Let's make sure that the course aligns well and that everything works within that. And the first thing to do is something that we're going to refer to as the planning phase. This is basically where we're gathering all the information that we'll need to, identify the correct activities and develop those activities. And the first part of this planning phase that we really need to think about is identifying our classroom. And for many of us, this is really simple to identify, but we might not think about everything that it means. If we have an on-site class and they only meet on-site, all the materials they get are only on-site, then we know we are limited to what we do when we see the students, when we give the students things. But you might have online components or even an online course or program, or you could have a blended format where, maybe you have on-site lectures, but students can still get information from a online course website, an online LMS, or something like that. And so you really need to identify this classroom because one of the things we have there is the on-site component. Well, you can lecture, you can do small groups, you can do labs, but as we'll discuss further, if you have a different format, you might not be able to do some of those potential activities. So then the second part of this planning phase is identifying your learners. We want to make all our activities and everything direct to our objectives, but we also need to make them direct to our learners. And so learners, we need to try to not only identify who's going to be coming in, but also anticipate those that might be coming in the future. So demographics of learners, age, gender, socioeconomic background, race and diversity. And the reason we want to identify this is to make sure that we're able to connect with all these different types of learners. If you have a learner coming in that is 20 and a learner coming in that's 60, they're going to identify differently with certain subject matter, certain things you're teaching, or even the ways that you're approaching it. So understanding what are my variables with that, what might this span be, that helps you to understand when you're developing your activities, how can I make sure that, the 20-year-old, right around fresh out of high school kid is going to understand this, as well as, the 60-year-old who's been working in the industry for 30 years but doesn't have an actual degree. So, understanding both of those, that's really important. And then the other idea with identifying your learners is understanding their time commitment. So when they sign up for your course, for your program, do they know what they're signing up for, and what are you advertising to them that they're signing up for? Are they working professionals? Are they full-time students? Are they part-time students and part-time working? Understanding some of that time commitment can help you develop better activities that work with their time frame and work with the expectations that are set forth for them. We don't want to say, if someone's working full-time and trying to fit in school but they can't budget their time well, we don't want to, necessarily baby them or anything or coddle them and say, oh, well, I understand you don't have time, so you don't have to turn this in. But instead it's saying, if a student made a 15-hour-a-week commitment, that's what it was advertised as. We want to make sure that, all these activities we're making, everything within the course, it's fitting within that time frame. It's fitting within that expectation that the learner should have. And then the last thing is the expectation from the learner themselves. You need to make sure, if you have, learning objectives set that are, outwardly facing so students know that, if you have a course description, any syllabus or any other information that might have helped to drive the student to your specific course or specific program, you want to make sure that you understand that, because then you can work within those learning objectives to develop activities that are meeting those expectations learners have. If you go in, have a IT course and you tell a learner they're going to be able to take apart and put back together a computer, well, you need to make sure that you have activities within that course that allow the learner to take apart and put back together a computer. By the end of it, they will be able to meet that. So making sure that all these expectations and these understandings are not only clear to the learner, but that you as the instructor, you as the developer, are also understanding what expectations they might come in with. So we have a discussion, and feel free to share in the question section some of your ideas of how often are your courses updated or redeveloped. This is going to be a very central theme and gets into this preparation planning idea. And David, I want you to share, what about some of the courses you've taught? What's some of the time frame for that, and why has it mattered?
Let me think. Well, we actually update our courses, or I say we tweak them after every time they're run. So what we have is a sheet that I fill out after I teach a course. And right now I teach a course online. And what will happen is I go through my course, and if there's anything that I feel like needs to be tweaked, or that's something that needs to be worked on, I have a form that I fill out and I send it into the powers that be, and then we can work on getting it fixed, not for maybe the next time it's run, but the one after that, because you do have that time where you need to develop and edit and change some things. So we look at things pretty much every time it's run, but it's a little bit easier since it's online. On ground, we take a look I would say at a quarterly basis at places I've been, just to kind of sit back in a meeting and take a look and say, let's take a look. This course doesn't need to be changed because of the learner set changing, because of timeliness, current events, and so on.
Yeah, and I think that definitely makes sense. And then I see, we have some people starting to, we have a large
I
range of
like
things of
I
people
like
saying,
not enough, not often enough.
yeah, that's a good one. But yeah, so we have people starting to send in, some people like updated every 10 weeks. That seems like basically every session. Some people are saying a committee that evaluates,
Yep.
others every 3 years, every 2 to 3 years. I, back in previous work, worked at one of the largest worldwide career colleges, and we would have developments that would be approximately every 2 years. And so the important thing to note with that, especially as we're looking at, our learners, is that, how likely is learner set to change? How likely is the information to change? Ensuring that we're kind of working within that constraint, which it is a constraint, how often we're redeveloping and putting more resources to it. And so depending on the course, depending on how often, and depending on whether these variables are going to change, these are all things that we need to start to consider in this planning phase. And then David's going to start touching a little bit more on these actual activities and how we can start to develop those.
Okay. And same thing, if you have any other questions or comments, shoot them through the question section on your panel there. Aaron and I will try to man it. We also have our great friend and colleague Jen, who's going to hopefully answer some questions. So if you do have a question, we'll either answer it live here, or if it's something that we could send to you privately, you might get a private individual or a group message in that question section. So I appreciate all the comments that have come through already. There's a lot of variety, as Aaron said, from a couple times a year or every couple weeks to maybe once or twice every couple years. So it's just something to reflect upon and think about, and seeing if what you do currently is appropriate. Everybody has different variables they're working with, so it's just nice to it's nice to see what everybody else is. I'm always interested in see what what our fellow colleagues are doing in different campuses. So let's jump into identifying and developing learning activities. So, we have our foundational planning stages down. We identified our classroom in general. We have our learners, in general determined. So let's jump into this activity creation process. So before we jump right in, I guess with 2 feet, let's just take a step back and observe or assess the situation. And let's take a look at our goal. Our goal as educators, or the people who assist educators for some of us, is to develop activities that help achieve a learning outcome. So these learning outcomes are based on our course objectives, maybe our weekly or daily objectives. And what you want to do is you want to ask yourself, what do I want to achieve with this activity? Or what do you want your students to achieve with this activity? So learning activities can be lectures, it could be labs, quizzes, tests, different types of assessments, assignments, discussions, and projects. We call things, different things depending on what, one thing could be an assignment, one thing could be a project. But all these are all different types of things things to do, but they all share the same kind of makeup. And that makeup is they need to be meaningful. You and the students, can easily identify the why of this learning activity. Can you say why we're doing this learning activity? Well, that's great. Now, can your students maybe identify why they're doing this learning activity? And so you want to make sure they are meaningful, they are clear. And the learning activities need to, ensure proper advancement or proper development or growth during the unit or during the entire time of the course for the students so they can meet that overall objective. So you always want to kind of tie back to that main overarching goal, whether it's your class goal, maybe it's the program goal, or it's the mission statement of your campus. You want to make sure, they are growing from a novice to a rookie or a rookie to, being able to be properly trained and ready for job, placement. So that initial question of, what do I want to achieve with this activity can be accompanied by another question is, how will I achieve this? And the first thing you want to do is to consider, looking at the environment that you're in, as Aaron touched upon a little bit. So before you're kind of just thinking about, okay, I know my classroom, it's online, it's on ground, it's hybrid. Now let's take a look at the environment again with a certain activity in mind. And I bet if we described our classrooms or our lab settings in the comments here, I bet we'd get, slightly different types of descriptions. Some of us may be online, some of us may be on ground or have a hybrid. Some of us may have large areas, lots of room. Some of us may have smaller classrooms. I might have desks, you might have tables, for example. And all this, it plays into how you can develop a good activity, because that will affect whether you can do some things or you cannot do some things. So it's important to know, what is available to us and what constraints we have in our personal classroom area. And also, you don't want to forget that you are part of the classroom as well. So each one of us will have different levels of confidence in our content and our pedagogical knowledge and our technology savviness. And so this will dictate the types of classroom activities that you may choose, or that the board or the group that might choose, for that class, what activity should be implemented. And what you want to do is, let me give an example. Think about like a review type of activity before like the big test day. Experienced teacher with confidence in the subject matter, confidence with their teaching strategies, with their teaching strategies, and they're pretty savvy with the computer and so on. They might have some type of interactive Jeopardy style game with an interactive PowerPoint that has the bells and whistles. They have teams, and it's, they're working the classroom, and that might be a good activity for that experienced teacher. But think about that activity maybe for a novice teacher or a rookie teacher who comes in. It might be a little bit difficult because they don't have that confidence level yet, maybe in the pedagogical side or the technology side. Maybe they're great because they're a practitioner, so they definitely have the content down. But it's those three different things you have to kind of juggle and make sure that activity, can be implemented properly, because, usually you're the one who's going to be leading the charge for this activity. The students might be doing it, but you might be the teacher or facilitator for that activity. So you just want to ask those questions about, what kind of proper activities you can do based on the environment, whether it's the desk and tables or it's the person inside the classroom. And you might have to think about, a general activity like a review activity, but have a plan B to implement it of, what if we get a brand new person teaching this course? Can this person do everything? Or do we have an experienced teacher? Can we really utilize that person's knowledge and skills in certain activities? So that's kind of the first step, identifying appropriate activities for your classroom. All right, so we got our environment identified. Now it's looking at our particular set of learners, and Aaron touched upon this a little bit. There are several different avenues to identify learners and begin to kind of sculpt an activity based on its various types. First think about the competency level, due to previous schooling or opportunities or community factors that may play, into the socioeconomical realm of your students. Just in broad paint stroke terms, lower income students, there's been studies that find that, many of them attend a high school that may have inadequate funding, larger class sizes. It may be easier or less rigorous curriculum. And this will affect that competency level, of trying to bring them from that high school level, being a graduate from there, into a career college, higher academic level. And there might be a gap that you might have to kind of weave and be conscious about, so you can actually bring them from that novice level to that career ready level. So as you identify your learners, you want to think of, what type of learners make up my community. And with this, you can kind of set expectation and goals, which in turn will help, set activities that are challenging yet achievable. You want to meet those objectives, those course objectives. You want that to be a challenging process because you want to motivate them. You don't want it too easy. You don't want it too difficult. You kind of want to find that sweet spot, that Goldilocks zone, so to speak, of that challenging activity based on the learners that you have. And again, each one of us will probably have different types of learners. And it's just important to know that learner set and getting to know them. And I just want to touch upon one thing too with this activity phase of knowing your learners, and that's to just become aware of the diversity of your learners. And this may change, and that's why it's nice to kind of review and take a look at your classroom every once in a while and see if you need to change any type of activities or the way you do certain things. Because as you begin to develop activities, or if you reflect upon the ones that you do currently maybe, pay attention to like the wording, pictures, illustrations, because you want to make sure you find that type of media that accurately reflects your learner set. if you have a diverse set of population, or a population that's, a certain gender or race or something, you want to make sure those are accurately reflected in the materials that you share with them, whether it's, demonstrations, whether it's in text readings, websites to visit, things that you make on your own notes, your own PowerPoints. You want to reflect your learners, because the goal is for them to see that they can do it. They will identify themselves with the professionals, whether it's just a picture in a book or an actual professional that comes in to talks to you, and that might be an activity. They will identify with someone who's, like them, and then they can be, ready at the very end to, go into their field of choice. So it's just something a nice, easy thing to do is kind of look at your materials and say, okay, yeah, it does reflect it, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe I need to insert this type. My courses are made up of more females than males, but I do have a couple males, so I want to make sure I don't always say she. I don't always have pictures of a female medical assistant, for example. I want to, make sure I accurately reflect that group that I have, that learner set that I have. And
And
as
David,
we,
I wanted just
oh, go ahead.
to yeah, I wanted just to address a question that came in that I'm seeing that's kind of overarching related to some of the idea of how often should we update content.
Hmm.
It was asking more specifically about learning objectives, but I think that's an interesting kind of question as we're starting to look at, you know, developing these activities is that, you know, there is no necessarily right answer for redeveloping objectives, redeveloping content, or things like that. As we saw, everyone kind of has different ideas. And as we're talking about some of the ways that the learners can change, the environment can change, ultimately, when there is change, that's when we need to reassess things. So, you know, we do want to make it clear that, especially as we get into the objectives right here, when objectives change, and this will be a perfect lead in for you, David. When objectives change, we need to reassess activities. At any point, if we look back and see something has changed, either from the industry, as someone brought up, the IT industry moves really fast.
Yeah.
If you're teaching to, you know, CompTIA A+, they go and update their objectives every 3 years. Well, you know, for you when you're developing something, you can't just update objectives because objectives they serve as basically the top line of all of your activities and everything else. So you need to make sure, is everything still aligned? How do I have to adapt things? And that will lead into your next thing, David.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, and that's the way to go, is look at your objectives, and maybe, like Aaron was talking about and alluding to, one step further is looking at, if you teach, because you're going to teach to that vendor exam, whether it's CompTIA, a medical assisting, dental assisting, some type of Microsoft certification that you want your students to have in addition to having a diploma or an associate's degree or whatever it might be. Always taking a look at that vendor exam and looking at their objectives, because that's going to steer your program and your classes as well. And that's where someone was mentioning, like having a committee that maybe once a year you go and you look at it, the CompTIA objectives, and then you reflect upon how well your students are doing. Are they coming out of your campus having the required skills? Is there, a general theme where they're lacking somewhere? And that's where you kind of, maybe fine tune some objectives. And that is a nice lead into this next part, and it's the last part is circling back and always looking at your objectives. Yeah, you look at yourself, you look at your classroom, you look at your learners, and you could kind of have a good activity. Now you always want to kind of like always be looking back at that objective, and as you build that activity and you maybe tweak it the next 10 weeks, you tweak it next year. Always look back at that objective and say, am I meeting that objective? Is that intended learning consequence, is that still being met? Or is that intended learning consequence change? Now do I need to meet that change? So, as we choose to brainstorm or outline or develop it, always think back to that objective. What is that intended learning consequence? Is the learner expected to be able to perform some activity or some learning objectives that you need them to actually practice the activity, like Aaron alluded to before? If they need to take down and build a computer, does that activity really show them how to do that? And can they do that because it might be done on a test? So you always have to be aware of that vendor exam, where if it's just not true, false, multiple choice, if there's some kind of practical component or a lab component to it or a hands-on component, making sure they're ready for that. So, always look at that objective. It's something simple, but something that's easy to forget because you get into the nitty gritty of making a fun activity or a motivational type of activity, and you're looking at, yourself, your learners, what kind of classroom do I have a computer lab to go to? Can I just do it in the class? Can I maybe utilize maybe our online website or whatever it might be? And you might start steering away by accident that objective. And so always have that in mind, even when you're done and before you finalize that activity, go back and see what the objective is, and then look at the activity and break it down into parts and say, okay, am I meeting this objective?
And David, I want to add before we get into, because we're going to have some scenarios coming up where we're going
Mm-hmm.
to, go over some ideas and get to a little more practical, because a lot of this is very theoretical, because one of the main ideas is that we're trying to convey is that, we can't tell you do, one, two, three, do those steps and you'll be great because there's so many variables. There's the variables of your class, your instructor, and everything like that. But there was an interesting point that you brought up that I actually want to have a question and have some people go and respond in and pose this to you
Okay.
is, for those that go and, work in course redevelopments, or some people said that they, see how activities work and go and update them,
Mm-hmm.
after a given term to go and fix this like you do, David. Now, for those that are doing that, are you being cognizant of the learning objectives? Are you making sure that these changes are not just making that activity functional, but are you looking at it in the larger picture and saying, okay, this activity didn't work for this reason. I want to make this change, but does it still align? And so, yeah, if anyone has any thoughts on that, and David, I'd like to get your thoughts because that's one of the clear challenges, as we've been saying, is always making sure they're connected. So how do you, like, what's your advice to people of how do you go about that in such a short time frame when just changing it from maybe session to session?
That's a good point to make. The way I look at it personally is, which we'll go into here a little bit. And I'll share what a type of curriculum that might be. But for me, I look at the activity and say I need to tweak it because the students just weren't having the outcome I desired, or there was some issue with it. I need to tweak it. Well, when I'm done tweaking it, I look at, does it meet that? And for me, it's going to be a weekly objective. And then does that weekly objective meet that overall course objective? Does that course objective meet some type of objective on the vendor exam? And just seeing that path, that backwards path, allows me to kind of just fine tune check it and say, yes, this still should work, but it all depends on how I implement it, of course. But at least I have the check of, we are covering this type of procedure, this type of objective in this learning activity. But I have my map handy. I don't know if that's more nerdy than most people, but it's something that I have. It's not on the top of my desk. I'll promise you that. But it's like in a binder that I have that I could review. If it goes through a committee, the committee will probably have all that stuff, and that's what I do. I have it my personal one because I kind of want to help them along, and I'll pass it to that committee that reviews it, and then they okay it and they have the big binder of all the course objectives, weekly objectives, the map to all the activities, and making sure everything still checks out.
Perfect. Yeah, because that's a good lead in as we're going to be looking at some scenarios upcoming that give just kind of some situations, a learning objective, and we're going to start discussing what are some potential activities we can make. As we'll share some, we want some ideas from everybody here, share those in the question section.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and as someone said, I really like, how you describe that, David, because, someone said, you after the course is made, you're making changes and thinking, well, this will work for the students, but you might not double check on those objectives. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things we want to get you thinking objective driven. Everything is objective driven, and we'll see how often we can use that phrase to help
Yeah.
ingrain it, because it definitely helps you to ensure that, again, all of those expectations, everything from that planning idea is still being met. And if things keep changing, so there's some good questions coming in.
Yeah.
Do you ever measure the outcome over a period of time? And you definitely do. You want to make sure that, whether it be from the grades, whether it be from a specific assignment or anything like that, you definitely want to track and change things accordingly. And especially as it's tied to specific learning objectives, are there ones that are, students are meeting more often than others? Well, if there's a lesser one, you need to adapt things. Um, but that idea is one that we're actually going to delve into a little more at the next one, discussing some assessments and things like that. But even as things change, you still have a standard that you're looking at of, are they meeting the objective? I'm going to, set a rubric. I'm going to set some sort of idea and, make sure that that is being met. It's essentially, it comes down to, are these activities, is everything you're setting forth, is the objective being met? And you can, for each student, you should be able to come to a really easy yes or no through many of these activities that we have.
Mhm.
So I like that question.
Yeah, and I was just chatting here with Jane, who's in our chat room, and she had a question that came across a couple of times, and it's like being honest to everybody, do every time that you go through and tweak an assignment, do you always go, does this still meet the objective? Because you're assuming it does, and you being a practitioner and you being an instructor, it may well be very well aligned to that objective, but it's always just a nice practice just to double check, because sometimes you tweak something this time around and maybe my colleague teaches it next time and he or she tweaks something the next 10 weeks, then I tweak something again. You just don't want to stray too far. You always just want to kind of keep that in mind. So even though if you're not double checking, it's not like the end of the world type thing, but it is something just to take the extra minute on and double check that objective. So I appreciate everybody being honest in there and sharing their own trials and successes as we deal with trying to tweak our activities and aligning them to the objectives. But I do want to jump into the scenario here, Aaron, if you don't mind, if I'll just kind of
Let's do
start it
that.
up.
I like these scenarios.
Yeah. So what I want to do is we've been talking about these activities, and what I'd like to do is jump into a scenario, and if you guys could help me out in the messages, is I want you to start thinking about and we're just brainstorming, just spitballing some things here. I want to give a scenario, and based upon maybe stuff that you've done before at your own campus, what you've seen done by your colleagues, just shoot out some type of activities. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. Just shoot them out, because I just wanted to show you how easy it is to come up with an idea, to start making an activity just by an idea, and having that objective in there and having that learner set idea, your classroom environment idea, is how you can take that idea, that brainstorm idea, and kind of sculpt it into an actual appropriate and effective activity. So let's jump into the first scenario here. And this first one is going to be, I want to just touch upon like a general ed type course first. And there is some of our campuses that we work with have a online student success strategies course. It's like a course that students usually take, hopefully one of the first ones, but it might be one of the first couple ones that they take. And it's to help them with that adjustment from, being, maybe from a high school or being a worker in the field to maybe coming back into the classroom or going into the college level. And so you're teaching this on-ground success strategies course for incoming students in a typical classroom. So we're on-ground, typical classroom. One of the objectives is, and this is going to be a course objective, by the end of this course, learners will be able to generate, evaluate, and demonstrate tools for academic success. So again, what we want to do is take a look at this and think about what are some potential activities. Again, we're just brainstorming that can be developed for this objective. I don't need fully developed detailed activities yet, but just some ideas to share. And again, what we want to take a look at right now is, okay, I know I'm on ground. A typical classroom, because I didn't want to say, a typical classroom is just the standard, desk or chairs. It doesn't matter. It's not like in a computer lab. There's no lab component to it. And we have the objective and some of those action verbs that Aaron mentioned at the very beginning, generate. They need to generate tools for academic success. They need to evaluate the tool for academic success, and they need to demonstrate, put it to use. So what are some potential activities that can be developed for this objective? And I'm going to kick it over because I think we got a lot of replies in here. Aaron, do you see any that pop out?
Yeah, we have some. Yeah, the first I want to address a question. So learning objectives, learning outcome, course outcomes, terminal course objectives. I'm trying to think of more terms for it. Anytime, these are all just your learning objectives. They're all the same. me and David will use some that we like to refer to. Some people at your schools might use similar ones. Ultimately, when talking about objectives, typically these are your learning objectives. And yeah, they have lots of fun names that typically all mean the same. Um, just given the context, they could be, weekly objectives, as David will talk about later, course objectives for the whole thing, but objectives and outcomes are typically synonymous.
Hmm.
And we do definitely have some coming in for this one, of like making some, weekly schedule. I've seen a couple times here, which I really like, because that's
Calendars.
definitely, yeah, you're generating this for yourself. That's definitely good. I like an idea. I'm not sure if anyone's had it, but I like the idea of, actually having someone present something. I always like putting someone up in front of the classroom, having them do a presentation, having them be creative. Say, what is a tool for academic success you use? Let's have you demo it out. Quite literally, you know, give them the learning objective and have them do a presentation to show that they can do this. Put the student in control.
Hmm.
What are some of them that you're seeing come through, David?
I see some overarching themes, which is perfect, and this is kind of what I like to do when I'm developing it. I see, everybody's taken advantage of the tools for academic success, and it seems like there's time management because there's a lot of the calendars or keep a daily planner type deals. So I like some of those. There's note taking because that's a skill that I think some students may lack coming in. I don't know about you, but I have students who like to record every single word I say or put on my PowerPoint. There's different techniques that might not be successful for them. They might need to, use the Cornell method or use some other method and just introducing it to them and seeing some stuff. And I see some test taking ones. So this is perfect. And this is kind of like that first step. You get these ideas. Okay, what are tools for success? Time management, test taking, note taking, reading the textbook I saw from Sheila. There's a lot of good ones in here. And that's what you want to do, develop these overall themes, because then that's going to help you pick a topic to delve into. And so then you look at your learner set, and I think, you know what, my students, it's pulling teeth to read the textbook. I'm going to have a textbook kind of strategies, a reading type of strategy. And I think time management is probably across the board for a lot of us an issue. So I do like the calendar idea or some keeping some type of planner or managing your time. And then that though maybe
Yeah.
those two will be my activities that I jump into. So you can kind of see how we kind of sculpt this. And again, I'm keeping in mind my own personal students, the classroom space that I have, and that objective of by the end of this course, learners will be able to generate, evaluate, and demonstrate tools for academic success.
Yeah, and I'm seeing another one, similar idea came in through email, and we're having some of the questions of this idea of using a group learning philosophy, have the groups get together.
Oh yeah.
One person says determine strengths and weaknesses and determine plans together to overcome it.
Mm-hmm.
Another had, groups together and then come to an overall group afterwards. And one of the things that I wanted to point out from this, which I really like that because, David, you're talking about some of like projects, assignments, but a learning activity can be a lecture. It
Mm-hmm.
can be, a time where you normally would, go up there and lecture to students or however you might do it. And so some of these ideas, these activities can essentially supplant lectures or go hand in hand. Maybe you lecture some, maybe then you break people into groups and have them determine the route that they're going to go with some of this, have them, work in breakout sessions and come back together. And so, yeah, a lot of this is, really good ideas.
Oh
And
yeah, I do
I
like the
think,
group one
yeah,
that Brandy and them put down because it is something that is different as well, and I think they could identify with each other. Me saying, you know, this is good time management things is different from maybe one of their peers saying this is how they do time management. So I do like that one. And then I think about too, if I was teaching it, do I feel comfortable or would my faculty members feel comfortable doing group assignments? For example, if I have maybe a more novice teacher who doesn't have that pedagogical skill built up yet, they're brand new into it. You know, do I want to set them up in a group environment where students are working in groups? It might be yes, but it's just something you start when thinking about, and that's where we always circle back to that environment to you as the instructor to your learners. So there's a lot of good ones in here. Um,
Yeah, and there's one question I wanted to quickly address, and
sure.
then,
We'll
yeah, I
jump
know
into
we
them.
want to keep moving on some more of these scenarios.
There's so many good ones.
But the one question, yeah, the one question that came forth is someone said they have to do a review of their, learning outcomes, learning objectives in a given section, and, pose the idea that aren't grades the best indicator. And, I'll touch on this quickly right now, but also on Thursday we have my personal favorite session, all about assessments, where we're going to talk about assessments. And one of the big ideas is that you can have assessments, you can have something going and giving a student a grade, but is it actually meeting that learning objective? And again, that's what the entire session is about Thursday. But the first thing I'll go and say with that, quickly to touch that here, is that think about any learning activities also, and are you sure they're meeting the objective? That's why we review the objective too, because everyone can get an A because they can have, all the knowledge, they could have learned everything and answered well in a test. But do you have something where, like David's example here, where they're generating, evaluating, and demonstrating tools? Are they actively doing something, or did they just take a written test? Because then they can still get A's, but they might not have actually met that objective. And so we do need to keep that idea that, even if we developed a course, we always want to look back and make sure, is everything still aligned? Is everything still perfect? It's an overall, it's a learning process for us as well, seeing what's working and then making sure those learning outcomes are being met by our students.
Mm-hmm. That's perfect. I'm going to do another one, Aaron, here. We've got time for
Yeah, let's
okay.
do it.
Yeah, we've got so many good answers. And so this was more of a general ed one. Let's jump into maybe a different one. And if you thought of a lecture style example this time, this upcoming one, think of something maybe a little bit different and kind of get that maybe out of your comfort zone. Maybe do a group type of activity, or think of some other ones that maybe you don't already have or you'd like to do. So this one is you're teaching a political science course related to current events. So it's a current events course. The course is taught entirely online. So it's totally online. It's not a hybrid or on ground, it's online. One objective for this course is by the end of this course, learners will be able to critically identify and analyze various sources of news as well as slant in the media at the local, state, and national level. So just dissecting this objective as people start having a little bit of time to throw their answers in there. I mean, you're looking at opportunities for first local, state, and national levels. You're looking at activities for slant or sources of news. And then you want to, I think the key word here is critically identify, not just identify, it's that critical think, it's that higher level thinking. So what kind of activities can promote this higher level thinking about news sources, about slant in media, and maybe taking a look at their own local level, their state level, and national level. So what are some potential activities for this one? And I'm going to take a couple on this one because we got one more I do want to cover our next scenario before we move on. But there's a lot of great things coming in, so I do want to share a couple of these. And Aaron, do you have anything on your side that's coming in?
Well, I like the one that Sheila proposed because I've actually done this before, and this was honestly just an exercise I did for fun. And the idea of looking at the same story, because you'll have national stories on, Fox News, CNN, NBC, all these other news stations, and giving them the opportunity to literally watch these and share their thoughts in some way about it. And if you do that, you can start to see, is it dependent on the reporter? Is it dependent on the news service? What's it dependent on? And that's a really good one, just a direct compare and contrast and, sharing those ideas.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, I really like that. The idea of current events and how the levels of reporting on things also is a very interesting idea. What stories are getting reported? And you might be able to identify, well, at the local level, we have, potentially you might see, as I do, there's a lot more positivity in like the really local news. Our local newspaper, which comes out once a week, has had things about, lemonade stands and stuff like that. Whereas, when I look at, I'm near Chicago, the Chicago newspapers or national newspapers, they don't have those, fun type of articles as often because they have, other what they consider bigger things to report. So these are some good ideas. What are you seeing, David?
I see a lot of those, like giving giving examples of the same story which you said. There's a couple of those. I would have them search for false news, which is good. I think identifying false news or sharing a news story and getting people's opinions if it's false or not. I think that's a timely event now in our media today. There's a lot of good, so there's a lot of good ones in here. And then taking it one step further with all these examples is, when you do something with current events or you're linking to something, that's what you have to think about. Do you link to a certain story? Because, something timely today might not be timely a year from now, 3 years from now, whenever you have to update the course. Is your wording more generic? Find a timely, current event story, or is it find something about the 2016, 2017 presidential inauguration and all that stuff? Do you want to pinpoint it somewhere? Do you more general? And again, we're always looking back at the objective. We're looking back at the environment, yourself, your learners, and so on.
Yeah, and a couple others that I was seeing, people going and saying, looking online, analyzing things like that. And there was an interesting idea that just came in is the idea of having people use a limited number of words or limited number of characters and, almost like a Twitter response, which is kind of a fun idea because, not in the sense that we want students to be so vague, but instead you're making them be succinct. You're making sure that they can, articulate in a short amount. And the other thing I'm going to directly address one of these examples brought up. That's a really good one right now. And, whatever side of political spectrum people are on is perfectly fine. No judgment from me. But an interesting one in the news right now is how many people showed up at the inauguration. It is a perfect example of something we could have students look at different news sources, and you're going to have about as far on the spectrum left and right as you can possibly find with the numbers for that. And so it's a really interesting idea that, some of those, especially ones that might cross like our traditional party lines, are really fun ones, I think, to have students look at and try and step back and take that objective view and be able to analyze some of those.
Yep. And just to kind of finalize one thing, Aaron, because I see something coming across, which it's a good point to make. We have ones that, just, look at a false news story or share a false news story. We have some, I think I saw one by Leonard for one example, is he said, maybe do some type of bigger research project because, we want them to critically identify stuff. So maybe, a bigger project comparing and contrasting events from a local newspaper to an online source and so on. Will be it. But that brings up the point, which I think comes with your classroom and what somebody mentioned, and I apologize for not mentioning it earlier when she put it in the chat here, is that time is always going to be something in your classroom. You might have 45 minutes, an hour and a half. You might have them for 6 weeks, 10 weeks, and so on. Can you fit in a research project, or does a simpler project make sense there? And that's going to be, again, based on the environment of time and what you feel comfortable doing, what that objective is. Is it a very important one that they need to really take advantage of? I know, personally, when Aaron and I have looked at CompT objectives, CompT is the vendor for a lot of technology, like the IT stuff, and they'll say this one's weighted 40%, this one's weighted 30%. And so we try to keep that in mind as we develop activities to make sure we're meeting that percentage of what's covered on that vendor exam. We don't want to dive into something for 2 weeks in our course if it's only covered 5%, on the vendor exam. So I appreciate everybody putting in different types of activities, but I think I want to mention time, which I think a lot of people are mentioning in the questions is, be aware of time that you have. We're all limited time being instructors and stuff. So it is tough to weave in, activities. I'd love to do some research activities. I just don't have the time sometimes in my class. All right, so let's do one more here at the very end, and then we'll just wrap up on our last section, if you guys don't mind. And we'll have the last one here. Aaron, do you want to take this scenario just to be different?
Yeah, I like this scenario. I come from a science-based background. So you're teaching a science class related to zoology. The course is a blended format, and there is a lab component that is on site. The rest of the course is online. So one objective, by the end of this course, learners will be able to identify appropriate habitats given descriptions of made-up species. And so what are some of the potential activities? So essentially, we're saying, again, by the end of this course, so course objective, learners will identify the habitats and then we have made up species. So this takes away that idea of even, we don't have to use things that are already known, which already have habitats, but instead, maybe taking traits, taking, ideas, compounding them, bringing them together. So, some ones that I really like, um, and there's so many of them, but you can have, I think David, you've done some of this, like in an in-class setting, have like a Jeopardy style or a game show style, maybe put people in teams bidding based on, you know, little hints to questions if they think they can solve it and doing things like that. Um, someone coming in actually create a habitat. Given, you have information about a species, why don't you create it? Actually go and make it. That's a good one. What are some others you can think of, David? Are you seeing anything come in?
Yeah, there's a couple things coming in. Yeah, one person, Sheila said create. That's what
Yep.
she has capitalized. Create a habitat. Again, taking advantage of hands-on opportunities. And then I think she was starting to think about, activities. Where do you want your students spending their time doing activities? Do you want more lecture-focused activities? Do you want more hands-on activities, or something like in between? And I think that's a very important point to make, Sheila, is, looking at the activity and seeing what, if your objective is more hands-on and creating something, whether it's this habitat for species or whatever it might be, maybe creating is going to be a big chunk of your activities, and that's okay. Or maybe it's a basic course where you're learning terminology. Maybe it's more lecture type based and less creating, and that's okay too. But again, it all comes back to that objective.
Yeah, and there's a couple that came in that I really like because I'm a huge proponent of let's let the students kind of dictate their learning. We have objectives that we need to follow. We have styles of activities, but let's make things open-ended. Let's let their creativity shine and see ways that they can demonstrate an understanding. So someone shared, have them find a literary species and have them create models, blueprints, have them go and create that entire background habitat. And they reference like Harry Potter, which
Very
I
cool.
think we all, or at least a lot of us would agree, that would be a fun activity to do. And you're clearly demonstrating, well, what are the needs of this if it were in real life? You can take mythical creatures. I'm a huge fan of like the Greek and Roman mythology. Let's go in, take, even like a ancient sphinx if it were alive and say, well, where would it live? What would it need? How would this happen? And find ways to describe that. And another person saying, make up your own animal entirely and then define it. Literally say, hey, here's the objective. You need to be able to identify the habitat and you create the species. Combine ones together, give it various traits, decide what you're interested in and justify it, defend that.
I like it.
So those are ideas.
Those are
Yeah,
good ones.
I'm
I like
I'm
that.
all
Yeah.
about that
There's
creativity.
a lot of good ones. There's so many more good ones. I do want to wrap up our last section here because we've done. You guys definitely have great ideas with types of activities, kind of laying down that foundational knowledge. And Aaron, I'd like you, if you don't mind, to kind of wrap us up here with maybe like the actual
Yeah.
mapping part of it. Connecting the dots, so to speak.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we're gonna get into the actual connecting the dots. So we figured out what activities are there, and basically we need to visually show at this point, creating a chart, creating some sort of, I typically like, Excel spreadsheets or Google Sheets, and actually having these activities and assessments, lectures, whatever you want to call them, everything in the course, having them map to those objectives, making sure that they are covered. And one of the things I mentioned earlier that I'll reemphasize again is when you have a learning objective, when you have a learning outcome, you need to make sure that they are, covered in at least one activity. At least one activity, and they should be covered in multiple. You should have an activity and assessment, just making sure that these objectives are covered throughout. And that's what this mapping phase does. It typically isn't a very long phase, but it's really important to basically double check over your work and see, did I cover everything that's intended? And I think, David, you have a little diagram to share with that too.
I do. It's going to be right here. I do have this diagram, and this is just an example that one of our campuses uses that I've taught at, and it's similar to one that I've taught at a different place. But it's that connecting the dots, going from the activity, which is on the right, and I just put them down generically, and you could have a more specific activity that actually describes what it is. But just for the sake of today, kind of made them generic. And you kind of go to the left where you kind of see, okay, for me, did it meet this week 6 objective? My courses are divided into 12 weeks. And for week 6, does it meet this objective? And then so my class is a logic and critical thinking class. It's logic and critical thinking 101, which is the LGC.101. W6 means it's week 6 and it's objective 1. So somewhere up above on the sheet would be all the list of all the objectives. So I know what a week 6 objective 1 is. I know what week 6 objective 2 and objective 3 and 4 and whatever it might be. And so all I'm doing is mapping it. I'm going from this is the activity. It does meet this weekly objective, or it could be a daily objective, and it goes back and meets this course objective, and that's the logic and critical thinking 101. CO is course objective 4, CO1 course objective 1. So I can see, okay, in this week I'm meeting that overall course objective 1. I'm meeting that overall course objective 4 mostly, and maybe in the other weeks I'm meeting course objective 2 and 3. So this is just one example. We just want to share a visual example with you guys. You might have something that's totally different. That's okay. But as long as you can, and it's easy to track. So if you hand, all your curriculum maps to the accrediting body who comes in and maybe does a check on your campus, they understand it as well. And maybe there's proof. I could give them this map. I could give them my syllabus. I can give them, some of the activities, and it all makes sense. They can see the path from the activity to the weekly objective to the course objective. That course objective should, align to that vendor exam, and then, everything looks good. So project 1, assignment 2, and quiz 1, they really hit objective 1 for the course objective. They also hit that weekly objective number 1 as well. Again, that's just one example. So as we approach here, I just want to share one other thing. And just kind of go over the summary and just making sure we kind of keep these overall steps together as we wrap up here is just identify your classrooms, identify your learners, then you identify the types of activities like we did, which we did awesome. We found a lot of great activities that were shared in the question area, and then develop those activities. Keep it in mind, that objective, but also keep it in mind what a lot of you have put down is, what type of activity you want to do. Hands-on? Is it more doing? Is it more of an auditorial type of experience? Is it more of a written experience type of activity? And again, making sure, you have the good mix of all that stuff in there. And once all that is complete, you want to make sure you have that course map that says, this is the activity. Here's how it relates to any objectives that you might have in the course. You might have any in the week or maybe for that day.
Yeah, and one of the things that I want to add also, as we get into this discussion, as you start to share, how long do you think this course creation process should take? How long has it taken you in the past? And as we're talking about that, I want to share that, some of the scenarios that we've had, they might not, be directly related to things you teach, as was brought up, and part of that is intentional. One of the things we want to get you to kind of think about is this idea of thinking outside of your normal box, taking ideas from, you might be teaching IT-based stuff, take ideas from science, ideas that might be more creative, or just starting to open your mind to these other ideas. And again, think about some of the other courses that might be taught at your campus. Talk to other teachers about things that they've done. These can all really give you ideas for how to go about that process of creating these activities that really attach to those learning objectives. And so that's part of the reason we use a little bit more non-traditional scenarios here, just so you can start thinking about that, get the creative juices flowing. And I know, David, I'm sure this is true for you, but for myself as well, if I'm having to look at, a subject that I don't teach a lot and look at an objective for that and come up with something creative for that, then that's more of a challenge. That's the type of challenge that I want to then try and see how can I take that type of aspect back to, a traditional class that I might have been teaching for, 10, 15 years.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point to make. I was just trying to think of too. I've been thinking about how long it's taken me because it's an interesting question too.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so for this
Yeah.
question, one of the things that we want to kind of get out of it is that there is no set schedule
Hmm.
unless it's set by people higher up.
Yeah.
Whatever limitations you have, that's kind of what it is. And, for me, how it's always been when I was working with, in the career college sector, when I was doing that, we were told you have 8 weeks to develop this course or 16
Hmm.
weeks for this course. And if hiccups come in the way, if a subject matter expert isn't cooperative or, whatever else it might be, well, you're down to 12 weeks, you're down to 9 weeks. And often we kind of have to make that work. And so this process, for me at least, it's been able to be adapted very well.
Hmm.
And, it does depend on how much input you have, how much feedback, who else you have working. But often you can kind of do that planning stage and plan things out based on what you have available.
Yeah. So I
Have you
appreciate.
thought
Yeah.
about some of your developments, David? Yeah.
Yeah, mine's either like what people are saying, there is a set schedule to be involved, or there might just be some input, like you said, from students or gathering teacher feedback who's taught the course. So that might take some time. Usually it's just a set schedule. You have 3 months to develop this new class, or 3 months to redevelop these activities. So we're getting answers that are all over the place. So, like Aaron was referring to, there's no right or wrong answer, but just something that's interesting to kind of keep in mind. And you can kind of do some of the legwork in keeping some type of reflection journal or whatever it might be unofficially, and that way, when the time comes, you have these great ideas to share with your fellow teachers, with the staff administration of ideas that you could do in that class. Um,
Mhm.
as we come past this hour here, I do want to let everybody know that if you have any additional questions, shoot them over in the question area. We'll stay on as long as we can before we get kicked off. But we'll answer any other questions. If you need to go, that's totally great. We're at the end of our presentation. You're more than welcome to grab, if you weren't here earlier, grab the handouts on your control panel. We do have the certificate that will be available also on the ACCSC website as early as maybe tomorrow. And there's a sign-in sheet, a copy of our presentation, which also will be available. That way you can always have this handy-dandy information with you. And if you have any questions to us, Aaron or I know sometimes an idea pops in my head later on in the day. And I will go, shoot, I wish I would have asked that question in the webinar. Here's our email. It's aaron.appleby@ciena.com, and me, david.grimes@ciena.com. If you jot that down, feel free to shoot us an email anytime, whether it's later today, or maybe you're doing a activity development 2 months from now, and you're like, I just want some ideas, or I want to shoot something past you guys, or you forgot something. Um, Feel free to contact us. We're always happy to help. I always think, we're all in this together. We're all fellow educators. We're all pushing for the same goal for our students and for ourselves. I'm always happy to help. I want to be your teacher assistant who works for free. And so definitely contact us anytime you need anything, or feel free to stay on the line here for a little bit. Other than that, I know Aaron and I, we really appreciate your time. Yeah, taken with us here this afternoon, or half morning, half afternoon for some of us. And we do have one more coming up on Thursday about assessments, so you could sign up on the ACCSC website. And if not, I hope you enjoyed it. And if some of you are coming back Thursday, we'll see you guys and girls on Thursday. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And while we're waiting to see if there's, a few more questions coming in, I did want to add one of the things that I like to do for course developments is I've actually made a little sheet that basically shows, my stages of the process and my ideal times for it. So it says, for the planning phase, ideally I need 2 weeks for that, or however long. And getting that down of an ideal situation, you can then, make sure you have all the steps. And at any point, if you're told, well, you have 12 weeks to develop and your ideal situation is 24, you know that you need to cut your time in half. And so it gives you an idea based off of your ideal situation and then how you can start to, work with some of that. Then David, do you see any good questions coming in?
Yeah, there's a lot of good ones. One is that people like me being a free teacher assistant, that's fine. But the other one, Jane poses and a couple other people pose, which is excellent. Which I was trying to type to here in a second is, where do you start? If you've never done this before, Aaron, we just threw a bunch of stuff at you, and we're talking about mapping. And before I was talking with somebody, you're asking your instructors sometimes if you don't have a team that does this, you're saying, hey, I want you to be a practitioner, I want you to be an educator, and I want you to be a curriculum mapper. And that's just a lot of stuff for maybe if you have a part-time staff or you only have teachers that come on every so often, or even the ones that are there all the time. That's a lot to ask for them. Where do you begin, or how would you begin the process of mapping your activities to the objectives? I guess I don't, not to put you on the spot, Aaron, or anybody else out there.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in that situation, the first thing you do is I would actually just set up that, mapping spreadsheet right away. So have your objectives in the first column, all your activities in the top row, and just put a little checkbox where, the activities, what objectives they might fit to, and just see quite literally what's already covered at this point here and there. And once you do that, then you can start to kind of get a little fancier into this idea of, well, is this one really mapping perfectly? Maybe not, I should adjust it. But really getting that first, getting that initial kind of table showing, what's already there. That's the first part, especially as you would have inherited a
Mhm.
course. If you're starting from scratch, you can obviously make that up. But when you've inherited things, you first need to take inventory of everything, know everything that's there, and then figure out what objectives are already mapped to that. David, what about you?
I just sent to Jane, so hopefully she got this okay. But I want to share it with everybody else, and hopefully that's okay. Is that I think it's best if you're just starting off, or you don't know where to start. I think it's best to either you personally, or get some of the go-getter colleagues that you might have, and have them become the experts on this. What we did at our campus, we had two people who knew how to do this, in their sleep. And what they did was they visited our different campuses and led workshops. And so they helped our academic deans, they helped, the certain people at each campus become experts. And then they, all three of them helped the faculty members. Our faculty members actually mapped, which again is asking a lot for some people, but it did get done, and it looked great when it was done, but it was a process. But either I wouldn't reinvent the wheel, and I told Jane, I invite anybody else, if you have any questions, or if you want to chat with us later on, definitely feel free to contact us, and we can kind of work out a schedule for a quick chat to show what we do or what we have done. But if you don't have time for that, I would say either find somebody in the organization, or reach out to your organization because they might have examples. Or if you do this already, contact ACCSC, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to you know, um, get you the resources that you need, um, or find other colleagues, other nearby campuses. Maybe you have a friend that teaches somewhere else. I just wouldn't reinvent the wheel. I would use something that works, it's proven to work, and then become an expert, have experts in that area who can pass on that knowledge. And have a workshop day where teachers, you do it all at once. Maybe you all do the same course, or they all bring one of their syllabi to that workshop, and then you could kind of bounce back and forth with maybe another expert in that one, and kind of show them the ropes, and they'll get it. And it's going to be a process, but once everybody gets it, it just, it's really nice to have that done. And the legwork is getting it done once, because then you're just touching it up later on.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because definitely there's always so many resources that you can find, at your school, at your, institution, colleagues you might have worked with before. You definitely want to, as David, as you're saying, you want to use everything at your disposal. You
Yeah,
want to take advantage of that.
yeah, and it is tough, because you are constrained to the amount of time that the teachers are with you. Some people will come in right as the bell rings, and as soon as the bell hits, they're out of there. They put in their time. That's probably more of a big, it's a cultural thing at the school or climate too that you're working on. But that's just the reality of the situation, and you're not going to if I said, "Hey, Aaron, come on in, on your weekend to do this," they're going to say, Psh, yeah, right. So we try to work in with the time that we have with them. Whether it's faculty meetings, we actually have that they need to do a certain amount of teacher workshops with us and stuff. And that could just be some of that stuff, or maybe it's just somebody that you could find room on the administrative side that you can have a little bump or something where they can become the person that works on curriculum development or works on mapping and stuff for the time being to get some things done. um, you know, uh, I guess you just have to be creative, unfortunately, because money is always an issue and time is always an issue. And I wish I had an easy answer for some of you guys who are asking about, like, where do we start, or how do I get everybody on board?
Yeah,
I don't
and
have
I do also want to,
that yet.
yeah, I do want to add, one of the things, so myself and David have worked, through Ciena with various organizations and doing that initial process, helping schools with that initial process. And sometimes for certain schools, I mean, you have budgets in place and your instructors, depending on the roles, are, not always the most well equipped, as David's saying, or don't want to take that extra time, already have a full schedule in. And so at times, some of the institutions that we've worked with have basically realized that, hey, in the time that it would take them to try to get everyone to get together, it's better to, essentially outsource that. And that's one of the things that we do. So, I mean, if anybody does have, like, they think an institutional need for that, we're always happy to, talk with people about some of the work that we do setting that up. But basically, as David's saying, once you figure out however you want to go about doing that, once you get that process started, it's pretty much there to stay. It's like, just starting to exercise after, not doing it for 2 years. It's that first few weeks, getting that, initial setup in place, that's the hardest part.
Mhm.
Then once you have that in place, sustaining that, it's just upkeep here and there. And so, definitely if you're having to go through that, just working really hard, knowing that the light at the end of the tunnel, it's there. And it's just getting over that first hill.
Mhm. Exactly. So I just had a couple more comments, and I think we'll probably get to boot here soon. I would say, what we'll do too is I get some people going on and just seeing, like, if there's resources available and stuff. Aaron, we could dig in and see if we can provide like a template for people. We'll see if we can make that happen and maybe share it with ACCSC, and they can maybe share it as part of the webinar um, handouts and stuff that they have on their website. But I know they are very good at listening to suggestions and stuff of if you want a repository of certain items, or if you want like a template. I'm sure if we work with them, they could provide one extra item of one template that we have may use, or maybe if they get enough feedback, that could be a conference topic that might be in the future, or something else that we can work with them where they could find another avenue. But definitely let it be known where we can help you out at, whether us as an Aaron and I, or at Ciena, or us as an ACCSC. They're really good at that. So definitely open a dialogue, and if you need somebody to contact, email me, and I could pass on the information, and then I could we could have a contact there that we can kind of maybe work out some ideas, and because I don't want to put them on the spot and say they're going to do something today, tomorrow, whatever, at the same time. But I do want to open the dialogue because I know they're very receptive for that stuff.
Yeah. And it looks like I don't see any more fresh questions coming in, but if anyone does have any questions, emailing either one of us,
Mhm.
we talk far too often on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But yeah, they will get to either of us or both of us, and
Mhm.
we're definitely happy to answer any questions people have, um, any any ideas you have, and yeah, we'll definitely share them.
Yeah.
But I think that looks like about it. So
Yeah.
yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah.
We have our last of the 4 presentations on Thursday at the same time, same place. And also, if you go to the ACCSC website, on their webinar section, you can see the previous presentations as well as this one that will be um, posted as soon as we are able to get it to them and they're able to put it up, and along with the information for the what is it, certificate,
Hmm.
sign-in sheet, and everything like that. So yeah, thank you everyone, from both of us from Ciena, and have a wonderful day. And we look forward to seeing you Thursday.
Thank you.